I want to travel back through the passage we were in last Sunday. We'll actually travel back through it next Sunday, if you'll allow that. It's in Matthew chapter 19, verse 19, 1 through 9. Now, when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" And he answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." And they said to him, "Well, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" And he said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." You know, the Pharisees had really weakened the sacred bond of marriage in Jewish society by making divorce an easy option. They had misinterpreted the law of Moses to mean that a man could put away his wife for any number of reasons if he wasn't satisfied with her, and that the only requirement that God would ever have is that he give her a bill of separation in doing so. And as long as he furnished her with that, then God was good with the divorce. And so they're testing Jesus with that school of thought that they subscribe to see where he's at with it. And Jesus critiques it by taking his stand on God's creation narrative. That in the beginning, God established a pattern for family structure and for human sexuality. And that pattern is binding on human experience. Jesus treats the creation standard as the truth of things to conform our lives to and to conform our practice to. And he just lets the authoritative value of that speak to this marriage culture of easy leavism that the spiritual leaders helped create. And so what I want to do this morning is just look at what Jesus is doing and call us to do the same. And that is for us to take our stand on that creation standard and see that as authoritatively binding on human experience. As you know, we live in an age right now that is growing increasingly hostile to that standard. That the biblical standard is seen to be pushing in the wrong direction from where Western social sensibilities are going. And I would like us to use this standard of God's created order to critique some cultural trends that are really moving away from it and will really trouble God's church if they infiltrate his church. And just ask the question, will God's church hold fast to this pattern, creation pattern, or will we give in to these trends? So I'm going to talk about two trends this morning, and then I want to visit a third trend next Sunday. And the first trend I want to talk about, and it's not a new trend by any means. It is not a new trend. It's always seems to be an intensifying trend and now a ubiquitous trend, and that is the separation of sex from marriage. You know, young people today are made to feel like something is wrong with them if they are not sexually active. We now have public officials in certain states, like Vermont, that feel that the best way to love and protect middle schoolers is to hand out free condoms to them. There are a slew of magazines that coach adolescent girls on how to be sexually promiscuous. We have universities that are public universities around the nation that are teaming up to put on sex weeks, where they bring in porn star speakers sometimes and put on all sorts of how-to workshops to facilitate fornication and set that free on the campus. But God's pattern, and I'm going to read that pattern again, that from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That pattern, God's pattern, locates sexual experience in marriage. It indicates that our sexual difference and that the sexual use of our bodies was made with marriage in mind. That bodily commitment was made for marital commitment. That he designed our bodies deliberately differently to interlock in an organic one-flesh union that we call marriage. Two becoming one flesh is unashamedly sexual. I believe it's more than sexual. It is not less than sexual. It is unashamedly sexual. And sex is a one-flesh act that builds up the oneness of marriage. Sex serves the process of two becoming one. And part of how husbands and wives become one life together is in the committing of their bodies together in the bedroom, where bodily union is really that outward expression and celebration of the covenantal union of marriage. And guys, sex is very good in God's eyes when sex is used that way. When the physical bond of sex is used to serve the marital process of two becoming one, it's very good. It's a gift that he gave to husbands and wives to deepen their attachment to one another, to nurture the unionizing arrangement that they have with one another, to strengthen that, to consummate that, to water that, and to assist the interpersonal bond between husbands and wives. And when sex is put to use as a relational and unifying act in that way, God blesses it. And God delights in his people delighting in it. God knows what he's doing. You know, there's a reason God locates sex and marriage. I want you to just think with me on that for a second. Why does God want to keep sex in an atmosphere of marriage? Because when you keep sex in an atmosphere of marriage, you are now keeping sex in an atmosphere of hard work in relationship to the marriage. The personal sacrifice of marriage. The mutual submission of marriage. The earned trust of marriage. The pressures and responsibilities of marriage. And by attaching sex to that atmosphere, God is keeping sex what God always wanted sex to be, and that is an act of committed love. And when you take sex out of that atmosphere, sex very much devolves itself away from an act of committed love. But in marriage, sex can be experienced as part of the joyful metaphor that marriage is, of Christ's covenantal union with his church. That our bodies in marriage can proclaim the unionizing love of Jesus with his church in the bedroom. One of God's frequent ways of talking about the pain that he feels in a broken spiritual covenant with his people is to use the language of sexual unfaithfulness to get that across. And so now of course I realize that we live in a very temptable condition in these fallen bodies, and many of us have a sexual past. And this sermon is not meant to shame anybody about their past, but to encourage us to do the right thing with our future. Is that fair? Friends with benefits, hookup apps, robotic sex, prostitution, pornography, sex trafficking, they're all different expressions of sex outside of marriage. And they amount to a vandalization of God's good gift of sex. When you detach sex from marriage, you set things up for a very unloving use of sex. You set things up for the objectification of the human body, which is what pornography is. You set things up for the commodification of the human body, which is what prostitution and sex trafficking are. And when you have sex with no strings attached, you set things up for a selfish approach to relationships. People like to think that sex with no strings attached is some sort of avenue to greater personal freedom. I disagree with that. I think sex with no strings attached does nothing but tighten our bondage to our selfishness, because now we approach relationships from what I can get out of the other person without any sense of obligation to them, without any sense of substantial responsibility toward them. Free of all consequence, I can walk away at any time. That's not an avenue to greater freedom. That's an avenue to greater bondage to self-centeredness and self-love. There's so many lies that live in the separation of sex from marriage. And one of I think the worst lies, the most devastating lie, is that sex is just a mechanical act between bodies. It's an interpersonal act that's only skin deep. That sex is somehow detached from our inner life. What a lie. What a lie to think that you can cut off sex from the whole person and somehow sever your emotions from the sexual use of our bodies. I'm going to ask you the question, if sex is just a skin deep act, then why is sexual abuse so scarring to the soul? Long after any physical wounds may or may not have healed. If sex is just a skin-deep act, why is it so much harder for girlfriends and boyfriends to break up with each other after they have been sexually active? Why does it tend to hurt more sometimes? It's because sex can really make you feel emotionally connected to another person, and they have prematurely attached to one another in that way. Your private parts are connected to your hearts. I hope, parents, that you teach your children that their private parts are connected to their hearts. If sex is just a skin-deep act, then why do some people have to get drunk just to be able to go through it and suppress their emotions to do it? Why? If it's just a skin-deep act, why do divorced people talk about divorce as a living death? When roommates part ways that have been in a platonic relationship, they don't talk about it as a living death, but interestingly, that husbands and wives do when they separate and when they divorce. And maybe that has something to do with the way they forged a deep, one-flesh bond through frequent sexual activity, and it now feels like something is being ripped out of their own bodies. That's a lie. You know, let's talk about the lie of cohabitation, right? Try it before you buy it. You got to take a person for a sexual test drive for a season before you can know whether or not the marriage is going to last. That is an anti-covenantal mindset before you ever even form a covenant. Because it assumes that the future endurance of the marriage depends on felt compatibility and personal satisfaction guaranteed. I'm going to tell you something right now. That is not what gets people to their 50th anniversary. That is not what gets people to their 60th anniversary. Perseverance in marriage does not flow from felt compatibility. Perseverance in marriage flows from a person's faithfulness to a promise, and you anchoring yourself to an oath-bound commitment that you made to be there with somebody day in, for somebody day out, in an unknown future that you can't predict. And it's from that place that you have the safe space in marriage to then work on the sexual relationship and work on growing into sexual compatibility over time and writing out the ups and downs of that side of the relationship, because the reality of the fall affects it even in marriage. I hope this church can just really put on your lie detectors and spot the lies that live in the reasonings behind separating sex from marriage. But I'd like to use this creation pattern to critique another trend. And just before I do, I just want to say, who is God? God is love. Can we say amen to that? God is love. God is committed love. God is triune love. God is covenant-keeping love. And God wants the sexual use of our bodies to follow him in that kind of love. And so God keeping sex in marriage is about God keeping sex about a committed act of love. The other pattern I'd like to critique with this trend, it's a trend that has blown up in recent years, and that is the deconstruction of gender and the way we are trying to normalize the deconstruction of gender in education, in entertainment, in sports, public accommodations, in medicine, and in criminal codes, and hate crime laws that forbid open disagreement with it, and bans on conversion therapy. You can read about what Canada's doing, read about what just went down in Scotland. But we are conducting a massive social experiment on youth and children, encouraging them to act on cross-gendered feelings and bend their bodies toward that with hormone treatments, puberty blockers, reconstructive surgeries. Just makes you dizzy to think about the speed that this has suddenly taken hold of things. But transgenderism rests on three fraudulent claims. The first fraudulent claim is that gender is non-binary, that gender exists along a very big spectrum, and there can be an infinite varieties of gender in that spectrum. That is the first claim of The second claim of transgenderism is that gender is fluid. Gender is fluid, that you can move across that spectrum at will and make yourself any gender variety you want yourself to be. And the third lie of transgenderism is that manhood and womanhood have nothing to do with your body. Gender identity is completely divorced from the human body. It's strictly rooted in your mentality. It's strictly rooted in your psychology. Self-perception always wins the day when settling the question of transgender identity. Now let's go back. Those are really the three big pillars in the transgender movement. Now let's go back to the creation pattern that God gave and how he set life up. He made them what, Liberty? Male and female. Full stop. And furthermore, the male and female that he made are the same man and woman who become husband and wife in the creation narrative. Right? There's no severing manhood and womanhood from being biologically male and biologically female, where I am a woman who is biologically male, or I am a man who is biologically female. You don't see that in the creation narrative. The male and female of Genesis 1 are the man and woman of Genesis 2 who become husband and wife. There's continuity across all those categories. All right, God separated the human race into two different sexes. He wove a very basic binary design into who we are. Two gendered varieties of his image-bearing creatures. And you are either a member of one or you are a member of another. And you are marked as a member of one and you are marked as a member of another right down to every cell in your body. You see, God made mankind to resemble him in a special way. And our sexual difference is part of that special way of how we bear his image. We resemble God out of that duality. We demonstrate God's nature out of that duality in a fuller way when manhood and womanhood integrate together in the union of marriage. It provides a richer illustration of God's image that's there in the interplay of those two sexes and how that is brought to bear on the cultivation of children in the home. And that makes the deconstruction of gender an attack on God's image, and I'm going to add the doctrine of demons. One of the biggest lies that live in the transgender movement is that my internal reality is the absolute truth about me. That's a biggie. That my internal reality is the absolute truth about me. There's really no transcendent truth about me that explains my humanity or makes sense of my body. It's my inner feelings, my self-perception is the objective reality about me, so that what I say I am and what I feel I am is what I actually am. So when my psychology contradicts my body has to lose. And I conform my reality around my psychology, or I even try to make my body bend to fit my psychology through puberty blockers and hormone treatments and reconstructive surgeries and cross-dressing and all of that stuff. Right? Now I'm going to ask you this question. Do we honor that logic in other instances when a person's psychology does not match their body? For example, what do we do with anorexic people who have major body issues? Anorexic people who are starving themselves to death because in their minds they see food as pure enemy to their fat bodies, to their overweight bodies. Do we come alongside anorexic people and say to them, we want to support you in your psychology. You really are fat. You really should actually be eating less than you're eating right now and take more weight off you, right? We wouldn't do that, would we? We would call that hateful. Why does the body always have to lose? Right? I just want to bring that point up to you. Guys, we don't discover ourselves by looking inside of ourselves. We discover ourselves by letting something that transcends ourselves, that's external to ourselves, tell us the truth about ourselves. And we know who he is, and his name is Jesus. And he stands on this created order. And standing in our faith will mean standing with him and what he's standing on. But you know, there's another lie that lives in the transgendered movement. And that is your body is not the real you. Your inner feelings are the real you. Your body has nothing to do with the real you. And so you can just disassociate your true self from your body. The body offers absolutely no directional clue whatsoever to who you are or to how you should live. And so I'm really a man trapped in a woman's body, or I'm authentically a woman trapped in a man's body, is how the logic goes. But what you're doing in the transgendered movement is divorcing your true self from your body. And guys, that is dehumanizing and destructive. Because to be a human being is to be a body. Think with me on this. You are a body. You are a soul. You are a soul-bodied and body-souled thing to God. Both are essential to your humanity. You are not fully human, one without the other. Okay, how do I know this? Well, let's go here. Go here with me. Did Jesus Christ redeem the real you? Yes or no? If Jesus Christ redeemed the real you, then why is the crowning act of his redemption the resurrection of the body? If the body is not the real you and offers no clue to who the real you is. Jesus Christ took on a body so he could resurrect that body from the grave and cover our bodies with the incorruptible glory of his resurrected body. So if your body is not the real you, then what is he doing in taking on a body and resurrecting that body from the grave so that he can be the power and pattern for your resurrection of the body too? My point is that the real you is your body and it is your soul. And you are a soul-bodied and body-souled thing to God. God created you as an integrated whole, and it's wrong to try to pit one against the other, which is what the transgendered movement does. And saying that the body offers no clue to the real you. And praise God, guys, that the answer to our that the answer to gender dysphoria is the resurrection of the body, that one day we will be in a perfect relationship with our bodies in that resurrected glory. Because I think the church needs to acknowledge that gender dysphoria is real and will always be real for some segment of the population. Will experience a sense of alienation from their own sexed body. Cross-gendered feelings, sort of I don't feel internally aligned with the actual biological body that I've been given. And I would just want to honor that that's a real painful reality for some people out there, and I think that can be met with a lot of compassion, yet while still encouraging somebody to live in harmony with who God made them to be as seen in their sex-typed body. And if you are familiar with the biblical narrative, then we should not be surprised that there are people who experience a feeling of estrangement from their own bodies, because our bodies are in a fallen condition, aren't they? We are all born with corruptible bodies. We know that God has subjected his entire physical order to futility because of the invasion of sin. It has touched every aspect of his physical order, and it touches our bodies. And so our bodies are plagued with problems. We're plagued with health problems. We're plagued with body image, self-image problems. We're plagued with feelings of being out of sorts with our body, like gender dysphoria. But you have no moral duty, liberty, to support the fraudulent claims of transgenderism. You have no moral obligation to meet its demands and to adopt the use of this made-up language and made-up pronouns that they've had to come up with to support this make-believe reality. You have no moral duty to give that your approval. You actually have a moral duty to live not by lies and to resist it. Because once you detach gender from body and biology, you have lost all objective way of defining womanhood and manhood. And it leads to legal chaos and it leads to social chaos. And that's the point of transgenderism. God stamped this basic dichotomy into our humanity. Male, female, boy, girl, mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, uncle, son, daughter, grandmother, grandfather, niece, nephew, and it's good, and it's very good. And will you stand with him and say that it's good, and say that it's very good? Because that has gone unquestioned. It has gone unquestioned for thousands of years. That has gone unquestioned globally until now. Until now. And now it is being maligned as a social construct. Now it is being maligned as an oppressive tool of some sort of heteronormal society to suppress sexual minorities. It is the darkness calling light darkness. It is the darkness calling darkness light. Spot the lie in transgendered ideology and hold no fellowship with the lie. But you know, and guys, it's being codified into law to coerce people out of this duality. And you know what that is? That's real oppression, because that's thought control. That's the government trying to force you to deny what is observable to the naked eye. And I'm going to ask, at that point, who's the real oppressors? Is it people that hold to this duality? Or is it the people that are trying to coerce people legally and criminalize them out of that duality? Who are the real oppressors? Just think about that. But you know, God knew this was coming, didn't he? I've gone long, I'm sorry. I'm almost done, I promise. God knew this was coming. God knew that you would be alive in the one generation that tipped the scales in a different direction on this and broke from the pattern that has been held to without question for thousands of years. He knew this was coming, and he put his church here for such a time as this, to hold fast to his creation norm when people all around you are abandoning it, to stand where others are choosing to fall, and to be here for the victims that this movement is creating and will continue to create, and to receive them and to love them and help them to live in harmony with who God made their humanity to be. But guys, you cannot run from this. You cannot hide from this. The long arm of this movement, the long tentacles of transgendered ideology will find you out. They're coming. If they've not already come to your world, it's coming to your world. It's coming to a corner near you. You can't escape it. You can't just move to a more conservative state and think you can get away from it. Well, if it comes to North Dakota, I'll just go to South Dakota and be under Kristi Noem there. It's coming. You can't get away from it. And so now's the time to make up your mind. Who are you going to be? Who are you going to be when it reaches you? Are you going to accept the reproaches that people heap upon you for not affirming all identities and not supporting these lying ideologies? Are you going to accept the legal consequences and social consequences and maybe even criminal consequences that are coming? Are you going to accept that other people may say that I'm just one of those hateful bigots on the wrong side of history, and I'll actually wear that label as a badge of honor. I will count the reproaches of Jesus Christ greater riches than having the approval of the present evil age that I live in. Now's the time to make up your mind who you're going to be, because this is going to search you out and find you and force a decision at some point. Will you pay a price to be faithful to the King, to stand with the King in standing on his standard?